Hey everyone, hope you're doing well. Today we're going to be going over an update to the Renegades shopping list for Endgame PvE. A lot of you guys were asking for this late last year, and I decided to wait a little bit to see when the trickle of content would slow a little bit. And now it seems like we're not going to get any new impactful weapons in the near future, so now is a good time to drop the list. The priority system that we have is going to be high, medium, low, self-explanatory, and the fourth category that I've added now is the niche category. And this is specifically for maybe low mans, solos, challenge content, where maybe a weapon is specifically good in one or two instances, and I could see its usage expanding to other endgame content in the future if the content changes or the meta changes. So if you're really bored and you maybe have everything on this list already, you're looking for some stuff to farm, there's some inclusions there. We're certainly going to get to there, but we're going to start with the high priority stuff as it's at the top of the list. Now, in terms of ordering within tiers, as you can see, this high priority stuff, it's not ordered within tiers. So the role column here, it's just alphabetically sorted by function. This just tells you what the weapon is really good for, and the weapon that I've chosen to feature with like the picture and everything here and the perks, that's going to be what I consider to be best in slot for this specific function. Now, alternatives, sometimes these alternatives are going to be strictly worse than the best in slot option, but in other cases, like an exotic burst damage here, for example, the alternatives might be better in some cases, but generally the most common use case is what I've selected the weapon that I'm featuring for. So let's go ahead and start with high priority. The first thing that I think you should farm for this season is the DPS heavy sniper, which of course there's only one in the game right now, but it's the refurbished A499. It should outlive this artifact in terms of power. Snapshot aggregate charge is pretty good. You can go like Bewildering Burst or Moving Target if you want, but Gutshot Straight's interaction with Div has been patched. It used to allow you to do 20% more to Div bubbles. That is no longer the case. In terms of farming for this thing, I think there's two main methods of getting tier 5s in terms of time investment, so drops per minute. The first one is you can do invasions. Invasions apparently give you a lot of tier 5s at a very fast rate. And number two is Spider has a weekly quest, which isn't really widely discussed, but has been mentioned in my comment section, where if you go to him and you do some of these objectives, it doesn't show up as like a normal quest apparently. You get 3 guaranteed shiny tier 5s. And so because you want the shiny on these things for that accelerated assault god roll for 6% extra damage, having free 3 guaranteed shiny tier 5s a week is pretty nice. So go ahead and pick those up. You might get maybe the sniper or maybe something else that you're looking for as well. Speaking of that, we have the Energy Lucky Pants hand cannon of choice this season, the only legendary special hand cannon in the game right now, and that is Uncivil Discourse. This thing you're looking for air trigger and precision instrument for the most part. I just included cooling baubles here as like, I don't know. Honestly, don't even farm for cooling baubles. You could maybe look for some other stuff in the second column for perk swapping for just neutral gameplay, because PI is not the greatest perk, I guess, for just regularly shooting ads. But besides that, yeah, you want accelerated assault on this thing as well. You want a shiny, and then you want ionized heatsink as well. It's something people maybe are not aware of. You definitely want ionized heatsink in order to pump out as many shots as you can per mag with this weapon, whether you're doing solo witness rotation or just using Lucky Pants with really anything. If you're not playing Hunter, getting a god roll of this thing that's shiny is not like insanely important, but it certainly helps. So if you're in Warlock or Titan, maybe this drops to like medium, but if you're a player who plays all 3 classes, definitely get your hands on this thing. I mean, at least until it's nerfed, the Lucky Pants 1 mag damage of this thing is absolutely crazy. Next, we have Energy Rocket Pulse. Those of you who play this game even semi-frequently right now are definitely familiar with this Rocket Pulse. It's the only Energy Rocket Pulse in the game. The second one that we've received thus far. It's from the Solo/Fireteam Ops playlist, but it occasionally shows up as a Vanguard Alert feature drop, which allows you to get a guaranteed shiny. This thing definitely wants the shiny as well for accelerated assault, and now that accelerated assault's interaction with burst weapons like fusions and of course rocket pulses has been fixed, I'm, gonna recommend this weapon with the shiny variant, of course, so maybe farm GM Vanguard alerts or hope that you get a shiny drop. But yeah, Blast Distributor and Elemental Honing, that's the god roll on this thing. Pretty forgiving. You need 8 in the mag to actually get accelerated assault to shoot through all of your reserves, but only needing to reload this thing 1 time, even if you don't have 8 in the mag, is not that big of a deal. So really, you're just looking for honing. The first column is all like assistance stuff. Trickle Charge, not super necessary and kind of niche. Blast Distributor is nice for 65 extra grenade during damage, but not like a must-have either. Next, we have Energy Rocket Sidearm. Energy Rocket Sidearm, we have Returned Memory from the Crucible Portal Pool. Now, I haven't been paying attention to Crucible Portal drops this season, so I don't know if this was removed from the pool like a lot of other stuff like Mint Retrograde. So if it's not currently available, you're going to need to either gamble at the Crucible Tier 5 Hawthorne engram that you get from clan stuff, or you can wait until Bungie reintroduces a method to get last season's weapons in the portal pool somehow through like focusing or at Hawthorne or something like that. So regardless, Return Memory is the best, in my opinion, Energy Rocket Sidearm in the game for general purposes for like ad clear. It has Heal Clip, Incandescent Redirection, great sustain for just classes that maybe don't have as much access to survivability. And then you have Aberrant Action as an alternative, which has a similar role but no new gear bonus or volatile mod access. You have Lotus Eater, which has Repulsor Destabilizing, also an excellent pick, with Shoot to Loot utility as well, which we'll mention as we move later into this list. Rocket's items are listed multiple times on this list for multiple slots and for multiple use cases, so just be aware of that. And then Indebted Kindness is also an option as well in this slot. I just mentioned it because it exists, I guess, but not really worth farming these days from Warlord's Ruin. We have Exotic Burst Damage, which I mentioned a little bit earlier. I do think Parasite is still the king because Worm Byproduct is so good. It's good for like boosting Lucky Pants damage. It's good, of course, for boosting Rocket Pulse damage. It's good for boosting the new Dungeon Sniper damage. So Worm Byproduct is just excellent in general. And of course, it has that great interaction with holster mods for swapping. Alternatives include Legend of Acreus, Still Hunt, and Whirling Ovation. These are all like maybe slightly worse variants of what Parasite does, but they're for different situations. And obviously Still Hunt is, if you want it to be good, it's kind of restricted to Hunter. So alternatives, I say this lightly here. They're obviously for different use cases, but I didn't want to make 4 rows here for like different things that Acreus might be used for, Still Hunt might be used for, etc. Exotic debuff, we have Tractor and Div. Don't really need to explain this one. Tractor, I think you get it from like a New Light quest now, so fairly straightforward to get that one. And then Div from the Garden Puzzles, but yeah, these are both pretty important exotics. Tractor is a lot more important these days, but Div might see a resurgence given that heavy snipers might be expanded upon further in Destiny as we move forward into the future here. Exotic Multi-Tool. This one was a tough one as well because Multi-Tool really means a lot of things. Acquire 1 in terms of raw lethality, raw killing power, and underlight content still has yet to be matched really in terms of acting like a primary in its ammo economy, but still being very, very good in its time to kill on red bars. There are guides online right now that Echoes is over for like how to get this thing and its catalyst, but in terms of what I recommend, destabilizing rounds is pretty good for like a catch-all catalyst. I personally use Onslaught because I like the reload boost and the increased fire rate, just makes this thing shoot faster and faster. And a lot of people don't know this, but Choir, like every 3 kills that you get, has a little splash effect as well. And you can get volatile rounds on Choir fairly easily through stuff like Facet of Dominance if that's something of interest to you. We have some alternatives here, but these are not really alternatives. They're like also multi-tools, but they don't really do the same thing Choir does, right? Praxic Blade is more of a defensive tool, and then Ergo is more of like a utility tool. Praxic Blade, we've gone over what you want to use on the Praxic Blade in other videos, and I'm sure everybody at this point, it's not like you need to go recraft the Praxic Blade every time you want to change what it has on it, so I'm not really going to talk too much about the specifics there. Ergo, though, you do want a Wolfpack round sword. That's like the most important one for team play, generally speaking, because a lot of people are not using Ergo for its raw damage purposes. They're using it to boost legendary swords. And Wolfpack, I would recommend Caster Frame, Lightweight Frame. Those are generally the 2 best ones. I mean, Wave Frame is like also fine too, but those 2 are the ones that I'm going to recommend. And then if you want to go a little further, you can look into Caster Polaris. That one's pretty good. You can look into like Lightweight Telesto, Vortex Telesto, but you're getting into some niche stuff there. And then Arc Conductor is obviously really cool for ad clear. Definitely feels really fun to use, even though it's not necessarily like the most meta thing in the world. Next up, we have Exotic Total Damage. Now, this is another situation where the alternatives fit the bill of what the function of this weapon is, but they don't really fill the exact same capacity. So Finality's Augur from Sunder Doctrine, obviously very, very important for day 1 type content. Very, very excellent total damage, good for super gen. You basically are never going to run out of ammo with this thing. And then alternatives, I've listed like Wolfsbane here because it's technically a total damage exotic, even though it's used in completely different instances. New Land Beyond is basically just worse and also a weapon you have to commit to. It's not like a stick the boss and paint the boss and then swap off type of weapon. It is your main damage source, so it's a little different in that regard, but does have a lot of total damage. And then Anarchy. Anarchy is just worse than Finality's Augur in every way for the specific purposes of boss damage, so yeah, I'm not going to really comment too much on that. Just get Finality's Augur and maybe Wolfsbane. Next, we have Grapple Melee Setup. Now, this is obviously not for everyone. Grapple meleeing is not something everybody has to do necessarily, but it's been so prevalent, especially on Hunter, over the last couple seasons that I kind of have to include it here in high priority. It's used in a lot of challenge content. So yeah, Navigator, it's pretty good. Maybe I could move it to medium priority, but with how much it shows up these days, yeah, I think high priority is pretty fair for it. Next, we have a Kinetic Rocket Pulse, which I'm sure you're familiar from last season, Mint Retrograde. It does say Source Pinnacle Ops, but unfortunately it doesn't drop from Pinnacle Ops right now because it was one of last season's weapons. So unfortunately, it's the same thing as Return Memory, I would assume, and you have to go to Hawthorne and open the Pinnacle Ops engram once a week and do a little bit of gambling until Bungie makes a method to get last season's weapons. But in terms of perks, you just want rewind rounds. Honing and bait on the same mint is super nice, so you don't have to run multiple. And then in terms of other stuff, in speedrunning, we use Chain Reaction sometimes for ad clear stuff, Master of Arms, that sort of thing for just a neutral perk that you don't want to run. Maybe you don't want to run honing, you don't want to run bait. You can run Master of Arms or One for All or something like that. Lots of good perks in the second column. And then Envious Arsenal in the first column can increase your ammo gen a little bit if you don't mind reloading during neutral play. No alternatives for this thing for obvious reasons. Next up, we have Movement GL. Now, Gizmo Weft is technically not available right now. It's an event drop, but Call to Arms is returning fairly soon to Destiny, and I assume that Gizmo Weft will be available at that time. Now, this thing is just strictly better than Mountaintop and even the energy slot options, I suppose, but they don't necessarily compete. A lot of the time, maybe you only have special ammo in one slot, or you want to use a specific weapon like Choir or something like that, and then you put on Gizmo in the other slot because you kind of have to use a kinetic slot if you want to use Choir, right? So Gizmo Weft, the ideal role here is going to be air trigger and bipod. Slide shot is also a fine option in my opinion as well. Chain reaction is used sometimes in speedrunning, but kind of niche. And then the damage roll is like envious aggregate charge, but I don't think that's particularly relevant these days. Alternatives include Theodolite, which is in the opposite slot, but they're pretty similar in terms of movement GL capability. Like slot doesn't matter as much compared to some other weapons like rocket pulses. So I think Theo is fine. I'm not going to say like energy movement GL and kinetic movement GL like separately. The Mountaintop is a little bit worse. I don't think it's worth farming. It's way harder to get than either of these drops when they're available. And then Alethanum is obviously an exotic option that's a primary in case you completely run out of ammo. So that's something that's worth getting as well. And then finally, our last option in the high priority area is going to be Movement Sword. Sullen Claw is generally the best here because it has 90 total ammo compared to your standard swords, which have 77. Sullen Claw also, in my opinion, now that I've been using it for light attack movement a lot and just left clicking around, neutral content, just running around, the difference between the lunge speed on Sullen Claw and Slammer is very, very noticeable. If you go back to Slammer after using Sullen Claw for like a week or two, you will realize that the difference is very, very noticeable. So most people, when they play endgame content, they're doing stuff like GM Vanguard alerts. Maybe they're running around on a sword dungeon. They're running around on a sword, something like that. Sullen Claw is perfect for the way most people use eager edge swords. Now, if you're interested in speedrunning, more formal speedrunning, then the Slammer and Falling Guillotine still have a faster right-click skate animation, which for a lot of speedruns where you're crossing really, really long distances or optimizing your routing a little bit more, then you're going to want a Vortex Sword for those situations. But speedrunners are also using Sullen Claw in certain areas where they don't necessarily need to well skate or shatter skate, and they're just moving around an encounter. So yeah, Sullen Claw can be good for that as well. Just pick one up, eager edge, get some, decent ammo on your blade, and the other perk really doesn't matter that much. You can follow what I've listed here, but really not that big of a deal. And of course, we've talked about Equilibrium, 4 feet / 5 feet score farming on this channel recently, and I think it's a really fun way of getting the sword. Next up, we have the medium priority section. So first, we're going to start with an add clear area denial. Now these, of course, they're in the medium priority section because they're just not as important as they used to be. Our abilities kind of nuke enemies pretty well without needing to use like an area denial or anything to weaken them or chip away at enemies. These were mostly used to get like Transcendence energy, but even then, I've heard whispers that that's been nerfed on area denials. I'm not 100% sure. We're going to make a video investigating Transcendence and super gains in the semi-near future-ish. So we'll talk about that more when we get to that video. But for now, obviously, my recommendation still is VS Velocity Baton. A bit annoying to farm. You got to use Vesper's Host, but shout out the Icebreaker Caddy bot. If you guys are not familiar, you can go to twitch.tv/icebreakercaddy. You can just enter a code, and once a week on every single character, so you get 3 drops per week, you can just hit this bot and, get in the shower, type in the code, and you get a free drop, and you can focus 3 batons if you want. So even though it's not like a double perk or a triple perk weapon like a tier 5, you can still get 3 free drops every week, and it's basically no effort, right? You do a little jumping puzzle and you get there. So yeah, shout out the Icebreaker Caddy bot. That's a good way of getting VS Velocity Baton with Repulsor destabilizing. Motif 41 from this season with like auto-loading incant, totally fine as well. Auto-loading attrition orbs, that's also fine. Festival Flight in the other slot when that drops from events is also pretty good as well. Next, we have the damage area denial. That's going to be Motif 41 with autoloading and Vorpal. I've chosen to feature this one because Solar tends to be an affinity/energy that is more common in heavy weapons that are meta for DPS. So it would make more sense to have your energy slot match your heavy slot compared to something like a Psychopomp or like a Lost Signal or anything like that. Lost Signal, though, speaking of which, also has autoloading Vorpal, which is good. And then Psychopomp has Envious Honing, which is arguably better, but unfortunately it is also an arc weapon. And a lot of the time we're not using, arc heavies these days. So that's why I've listed Motif 41 here, but the alternatives are situational depending on what kind of surge matching you're trying to go for. As for where you can find this thing, yeah, Solo Fireteam Ops, it's currently available. It came out this season, so it should be fairly straightforward to get that one. DPS Crossbow, we have a good shout. A lot of people have been talking about this one. I'm still waiting to see how Bungie is going to treat this weapon, if they're going to nerf Mobius Quivers like bow interaction with crossbows. Obviously, they're going to patch out the ability to keep your timer buff from Mobius Quiver permanently with like the Rally Flag exploit. But once that's been patched, I wonder if they're going to touch up the crossbow damage of this thing, because Hunters really seem to have like 3 really, really strong damage options this season that look like they might be hit down before the next major endgame event. So DPS Crossbow, a good shout. You can get this from Pinnacle Ops. Try to get this with Accelerated Assault from the Vanguard Alert, or just from Raw Luck, Pinnacle Ops. Envious High Ground is the name of the game here. We've talked about other crossbows on this channel before, like Submersion and Opaque Hourglass, trying to figure out rotations with those, but those have perks like auto-loading holster on Submersion and like no good loader perk on Opaque Hourglass. Envious Arsenal really allows you to bypass the manual reload requirement of a crossbow the best out of any option, and so you've probably seen people using like Witherhoard and a Trace, or Witherhoard and like Wilderflight or something, and just spamming the hell out of this thing with Envious Arsenal. And it doesn't even have a good second column perk. High Ground is fine, right, if you can manage to actually get High Ground against the boss, but there's other perks that in the future could be even better, like Envious Honing or Envious Aggregate Charge on a crossbow. So I mean, yeah, definitely keep your eyes peeled for that. And it's not like Void is like the best, surge matching option either, even though this thing does have Accelerated Assault as a very, very good starting origin trait. Next, we have DPS Sword, and that's going to be Synancia. Not currently available, but will be available once Call to Arms returns, I'm sure. And this is going to fall into the medium priority category because you're not really doing damage with swords that often these days. And when you are, there are other options. You can use Wolfsbane, you can use the Praxic Blade. This thing's role is I guess a little bit sensitive because, legendary swords need all the help that they can get at this current moment in time. Relentless Strikes, Attrition Orbs, Sharp Harvest, that would be like the perfect first column, with Relentless and Attrition being your priority picks there. Elemental Honing is pretty good. Eager Edge is nice to have, as this is one of the only weapons in the game that you can kind of swap onto Eager Edge and swap off of it at will and use it for mechanics and then use it for damage on different loadouts, so that's pretty nice without losing any ammo. Burning Ambition is listed here, but Surrounded could potentially be useful in some cases as well. Alternatives, you have Bequest, Geodetic, and Summum. I might update this because, Aurora Dawn maybe should be here. But really, alternatives, you shouldn't be going for them. Bequest, Geodetic, and Summum are all more annoying to get than Synancia, and I would argue that you should just not go for them and just stick with Synancia. It has a good package, and if you're going to use a legendary sword for boss damage, there's no reason to really use anything besides Synancia, especially after the Fireteam wave stacking fix. Next, we have Energy 1-2 Punch Shotgun. Now, this one's a classic Ikelos SGV 1.0.3. Very annoying to get, though. Operation Seraph Shield, and then you need to either use Deep Sight Harmonizers or pray that you get red border drops. Really, really annoying to get this. And Grave Robber was fixed to not work with Grapple Melee, so unless you have Threat of Ascent, you are kind of out of luck when it comes to reloading this weapon. Even though it is a rapid fire, a lot of people are now using Starscape Null with Recon or Rewind, or like Prophet of Doom, which drops from Garden. So if you don't mind taking a little bit of shot count reduction from not having access to a rapid fire, then honestly feel free to go Starscape Null from Epic Desert, or you can go Prophet of Doom from Garden. A lot of people are using those two because, if you're on Prismatic Hunter, for example, Grave Robber will simply not trigger when you're doing 1-2 punch grapple melee damage. Next, we have Energy Orb Primary. So a lot of people, they do like bringing Attrition Orbs primaries into contest level content because orbs, there's a lot of stuff you can play around them. You get health from them, you can get smoke jumper stuff from them, you can get Facet of Purpose off of them. So a lot of people are using stuff like Yuletide Apex from the Solstice in order to generate a lot of orbs during mechanics. So Attrition Orbs, Chaos Reshape, that's the classic for damage. You can do Attrition Orbs Incandescent or Burning Ambition for neutral. And then Mida Mini Tool also has a similar role, but is a slightly worse SMG in my opinion. So you can go for either of them. Obviously, Yuletide Apex is not currently available. And as for Mida Mini Tool, it might return in the future, but we'll have to see about that. Energy Shoot-to-Loot Primary. The best one here is going to be Tarnished Metal, and the reason for this is there are no energy hand cannons with shoot-to-loot explosive payload, so people have elected to using scouts. And Tarnished Metal is the only lightweight scout, to my knowledge, that has this role. Has a nice open sight. Unfortunately, it is from Plunder, so if you didn't play during that season, you're probably not going to have the pattern for this thing. And so there's a couple other options. The most easy one to access right now is probably Sublimation from Kepler, which drops us at tier 5, so very, very easy to just get a decent shoot-to-loot explosive payload roll. Obviously, you're missing out on the lightweight handling and bonuses, but it doesn't really matter that much, I suppose. There's also Nature Reclaimed from Iron Banner, as well as Bria's Love from, I believe, Season of the Witch. So if you played during Witch and you have that pattern instead, that might be an easier path for you to go down. Shoot-to-loot primaries are used in a lot of challenge content, or even day ones during like final stands, just to pick up some ammo from the ground or something before you really send it for that last final stand. People definitely use these, so have it in your back pocket. Next, we have Energy Traces. Traces are mostly used for shoot-to-loot while still being able to keep special ammo in case you want to swap weapons. And Chronophage is the best one, technically speaking. This is from Echoes, so if you don't have the pattern, you're kind of out of luck, so you kind of have to go to Zur. Shoot-to-loot destabilizing rounds with a pretty solid origin trait as well. Retrace Path is available from Dares, which is always active. So if you just want to shoot-to-loot Energy Trace and you don't want to bother having to trudge through like Operation Seraph Shield for Path of Least Resistance, or having to, pray that you get a good roll from Zur, or like, red borders for Chronophage, then Retrace Path is an easier option to get. But remember that I'm not ranking these options by like how easy they are to get. Obviously, Chronophage is technically a little bit better than Retrace Path for neutral play, even though Retrace Path maybe has some other perks like Incandescent that maybe synergize with different builds. I do think Destabilizing Rounds is a better perk for Splash than anything Retrace Path has though. Next, we have Exotic Add Clear Heavy. This is for those moments where you just want to throw on an Exotic Heavy and just dump ammo into a room during like a puzzle solving encounter or something like that. I'm thinking of something like Vow Exhibition, where you just enter a room, there's a bunch of ads, and you just want to get rid of all of them without having to think too much. In the past, people use stuff like Xeno and Thunderlord for this role. These days, people just use Galley. So have Galley. And also, if there's a rocket meta, you should have Galley anyway. So just have Galley, which I believe comes from an exotic quest in Grasp. Next, we have Exotic Energy Primary. This one also comes from a quest, pretty fairly straightforward. I think the consensus on the 3 major energy exotic primaries, being Graviton Lance, Sunshot, and Trinity, has settled on really Graviton being the best one for endgame content. Because of its bonuses, it scales well and does decent damage to mini-bosses, has a solid damage profile for red bars as well, and the splash effect really does scale well into lower light content, whereas Sunshot, the explosion, is consistent but doesn't scale super well, and then Trinity Ghoul obviously scales the worst, being a bow, doesn't even one-shot red bars at, under light content, so Graviton Lance is going to be the recommendation there, in case you need to, I don't know, generate a bunch of ammo or something like that, or really you need to run an exotic primary. Next, we have Kinetic 1-2-1 Shotgun, which is like the equivalent of what we were talking about for Ikelos SG. And this one's going to be Perfect Paradox. Also came from Echoes. Great origin trait. Even though you don't have Grave Robber on this weapon essentially has like the equivalent of Rewind rounds because of its origin trait. And it does trigger off of Grapple Melee unlike Grave Robber. So you can choose to run like Pugilist or Threat Detector or another quality of life perk in the first column. And additionally run 1-2 Punch and Trench Barrel and stuff like that in the second column. And then alternatives, you have Swordbreaker, you have Wastelander M5, and you have Deadlock, all of which are technically worse archetypes than Perfect Paradox, but are more readily available. Like Swordbreaker, you just need to go to Crota, Wastelander is always available from Dares, and then Deadlock might still be in the comp pool, but I'm not 100% sure on that. Next, we have Kinetic Damage Sniper. Now, this would normally be maybe in the low priority section, but Conspiracy Honed with its dynamic frame is so much of a damage outlier that I kind of had to include it in the medium section here. This thing literally goes bar for bar, band for band with Mint. It's like a little bit better even, I think, without Darcy as well. So Vorpal and Bait, pretty solid roll. You can get it from Equilibrium. Try to get this thing with like Ionized Heatsink, same roll as like the Uncivil Discourse roll, where you're just really trying to max out how much ammo you can get out in one mag at once. And then there's some alternatives with like higher total damage but lower DPS significantly, like Praetor's Revenge, Lance Ephemeral, and something this season with Accelerated Assault. But yeah, for the most part, you're just hunting for this thing in particular. I don't think it's necessarily going to be like super meta, which is why it's in the medium category, but it's definitely a damage profile outlier. Next, we have Kinetic Orb Primary, which is the equivalent on the kinetic slot of like your Tide Apex. Multi-Mock is still the best one. You might be asking, why not Peculiar Charm? That's got like a better frame. This one technically still has better interactions with the time to proc Attrition Orbs, Kinetic Tremors, and it's got a pretty solid origin trait as well, whereas, Peculiar Charm doesn't have any of that. M17 Fast Talker also has a similar role as well, despite being stasis, but I would consider Multi-Mock to be slightly better than these other two options, just for how people use it. People are not necessarily using it because of its ability to shred through ads or its time to kill or anything, but it's just like a very consistent output of damage with Kinetic Tremors that you don't really need to think too much about. And then Attrition Orbs, it's obviously very good at generating orbs very quickly compared to some of the other SMGs and primaries that we've talked about on this list. Next, we have Kinetic Rocket Sidearm in the form of Tenacious Mastery. This one comes from Iron Banner, just like Multi-Mock. Air Trigger Chill Clip is the role that everyone tends to go with on this thing. Impulse and Decon are super niche. Surrounded in Desperate Measures, I could see someone using these for something, but again, maybe more of like a specific challenge thing. Air Trigger and Chill Clip tend to be all you really need for endgame content. Chill Clip even scales fairly well into lower light content because when you freeze an ad and you shatter it and you do a little bit of splash damage to the nearby ads, that can kind of act as like a pseudo splash perk. I'm also going to mention the Call here because the Call has some really nice utility perks like Slice, and that can be good on some specific builds, so definitely shout out the Call as well, but generally people are going to be using Tenacia if they want a kinetic slot rocket sidearm. Next, we have Kinetic Shoot-to-Loot Primary. So those of you who never got a Vulpecula with Shoot-to-Loot explosive payload, Corundum Hammer from Trials this season is here to save you. It is a 140, so slightly lower RPM, but it's going to have better stats than Vulpecula, and will certainly be a lot more useful outside of using Shoot-to-Loot explosive payload, because you can perk swap to stuff like Firefly Tear or Firefly Honing, and have a pretty decent, ad clear weapon just neutrally, without having to swap your weapon. And then you can just swap perks to Shoot-to-Loot explosive payload whenever you need that. So definitely, if I had to pick between the two, I'd probably take the Corundum. Some people might disagree. Vulpecula is still an alternative, even though it's way more annoying to get than Corundum Hammer with the right roll. And then, of course, if you really want to use a scout rifle or something, you have Hung Jury SR4 and Perseus D, both of which have Shoot-to-Loot explosive payload, even though they have less quality of life because they're not hand cannons. Next, for shoot to loot stuff, we have kinetic trace, which is the kinetic equivalent of what we were talking about earlier with like path resistance and those traces. We have unsworn from Sunder Doctrine, which is the only shoot to loot kinetic slot trace, which is why it's best in slot here. Shoot to loot, detonator beam, and hatchling. There's tear in the first column too. Not really going to mention it though, because generally speaking, if you're using a trace in endgame PvE, it's going to want shoot to loot. You have action item, incisor, and ribbon tail as well, but all of these don't have shoot to loot, even if their ad clear perks are like fairly decent. A special shout out to incisor as being the only slice trace in the game right now, and that can be useful in some challenges and maybe even some day one content, even though a lot of people didn't really farm for that role. It is a thing that exists. There's other slice weapons that are less ammo efficient that you could also use. I feel like a trace rifle is a really precise applicator of slice, and so incisor is maybe a little bit worth shouting out for that. Next, we have special quality of life shoot to loot. So I did mention how certain specials, we're going to repeatedly mention them on this list because they're used in different functions. Lotus Eater is one of those. I think a lot of people have warmed to using shoot to loot destabilizing rounds Lotus Eater for specifically explosive shoot to loot purposes because it's so easy to use. And the splash damage from a rocket sidearm, the radius is so large when it comes to picking up bricks, and it's very, very ammo efficient, very, very easy to use. So a lot of people have been using this in solos, low man's challenges, and speedruns as well. So I'm a big fan of Lotus Eater with shoot to loot, and I'm really, really glad that they made the rocket sidearm change. That allows it to pick up orbs and bricks and whatnot at a much bigger radius. Volta Bracket technically also fills this role in the kinetic slot, but because it's an aggressive sniper, it's definitely way more clunky and a bit more annoying to use compared to something like a Lotus Eater. Hopefully, we get a kinetic slot shoot to loot rocket sidearm at some point as well, and then I will not have to talk about Volta Bracket, even though Volta Bracket was used at some points in like some speedruns. Next, we have Survivability Primary. This is going to be like your Heal Clip sidearms, your Word of Crota with Repulsor Destabilizing and Cursed Thrall. You have Drang and Evening SI4, which are excellent. Compact Defender, which has an excellent 1 mag burst DPS damage profile against red bars, on top of having Repulsor Destabilizing as well. So yeah, big fan of hand cannons and sidearms for specifically survivability primaries, unless you're looking for attrition orbs, in which case you might want to look at some classic SMGs. Next, we have teammate support. Now, we have had a couple support autos come out in the form of Adamantite and Cusp Sempiternal since No Hesitation was released, but really, time and time again, tests have proven No Hesitation is just the GOAT. Physic is just insane as a perk, Reciprocity does not compare, and the Void Overshield that you gradually apply to people through cusps like Void Intrinsic is really not that important compared to the effects that No Hesitation provides. Second column really doesn't matter that much. Incand is fine, Circle of Life is fine, Attrition Orbs famously does actually activate off of healing allies, but it does take a while, so not super important. Your second column's not going to be that impactful. And I'd also like to shout out Navigator, because Navigator was used in some contest content on some teams to varying degrees of success, but being able to provide your teammate with Woven Mail when maybe they can't provide DR to themselves, and it also heals your teammates, you can sever targets with it. Pretty useful for that, even though a lot of people use Navigator for making grapple points. Don't forget, Navigator also has another function, which is actually potentially quite useful in some challenging content. Next, we have Withering Gaze primary in the form of Aisha's Embrace. Actually, this comes from Trials. I don't know why that says World. But yeah, Aisha's Embrace, I'm sure you guys saw that recently in the world's first Epic Desert Clear. It was used with Withering Gaze in order to debuff extend. Yeah, Withering Gaze being used for debuff extension even at the highest levels of play, so certainly something that you might want to consider picking up. Joxer's Longsword is a pulse with the same role. Exalted Truth and High Tyrant, I believe, also have similar roles, but Aisha's is probably the best one, being a rapid fire scout, very high rate of fire, and of course it's hit scan and long range as well, which makes it kind of ideal for having both of these perks combined. So yeah, Aisha's Embrace, something I'm honestly going to farm for at some point whenever I get to playing Trials, and hopefully Aisha's is the feature during that week. Okay, starting off our low priority category, we have ammo-less damage in the form of Outbreak Perfected. Now, this is not super relevant because these days our loadouts tend to just not run out of ammo, but in case this ever comes up, Outbreak Perfected is, I guess, technically the catch-all option for all classes, although I don't think it's that important, and honestly, I might review my primary damage stuff and even find an option that's better than Outbreak Perfected for like just general team settings. But if you're on Titan or Hunter, of course, you're using Peacekeeper or Lucky Pants with primary ammo, so that's going to be like M17 Fast Hawker or Antidate in both the Titan slots in Kinetic and Energy. And then, of course, you have Agape with Rewind Precision Instrument, famously used on Golden Gun on Hunter all the time to get your Goldie back very quickly for like day one content, so that's an option as well. And then for DPS rockets, we have Hezen Vengeance from Bog. Rockets are really not that relevant, even in speedrunning, where rockets tend to be the meta for most damage on most bosses. Yeah, a lot of people are not using rockets these days. You're seeing a lot of grapple melee, you're seeing a lot of heavy sniper, not a lot of, rockets, honestly, in a lot of content. Maybe just burst exotics as well, like Parasite. So a bit of a weird situation for sure. Some alternatives here, though, are like the When and Where, Cold Comfort from Art of the Nine, which you definitely aren't getting right now, and Tomorrow's Answer, which I also am not even sure if that's in the Trials pool anymore, so Yeah, rockets, not super high priority. You might be asking, why is Hezen a non-new gear weapon over the when and where? Just the sheer ability to dump rockets faster on Hezen because of that insane origin trait that it has makes it a lot more useful for speedrunning, especially in content where bosses die in like, 4 or 5 rockets, and then you can just do like rocket, super, rocket, reload, rocket, and the boss is just dead, right? So a lot of the time, Hezen can be better for that kind of stuff outside of some like unique circumstances. Next, we have Energy Damage Fusion. This is going to be Finite Maybe from Desert Perpetual. Recon Bait, Recon Controlled, pretty good on this fusion. Yeah, fusions are not super meta though, because in this slot, unfortunately, occupying it is something called the Sciaturn of 4, which is which is a rocket pulse. So unfortunately, there's not really a reason to use like fusions for damage right now. But yeah, if you want to use one, Finite Maybe from Desert Perpetual. You can also use Zealots or Techian, but those are kind of just worst in my opinion. You have Energy DPS Shotgun in the form of Pure Recollection. Also, probably not in the Crucible pool anymore, from what I know. But yeah, Envious Bait, High Impact Bait. You can also go Withering Gaze on this thing for utility. Alternatives include Unvoiced, Arcane Embrace, which is actually pretty decent, and a Sudden Death, but yeah, not really worth farming. That's why it's low priority. Energy Glaive. Yeah, sometimes glaives can be useful for defensive stuff. A lot of people are going to opt for the Praxic Blade, though, when your exotic slot is open, because it is generally a much more versatile blocking weapon. But yeah, forthcoming defense from Salvation's Edge, the only Chaos Reshaped Glaive, pretty helpful. Has Demo, Grave Robber, Destabilizing Rounds, a couple other things. The Heron, which is coming out kind of soon, I assume, is also a pretty good energy glaive. You have Nezarek's Whisper, the Enigma, just classics, right? High quality of life glaives in case you need to block defensively. We have Exotic Burst Roam, which is the 4th Horseman, Still Hunt, Izzy, Choir. Choir is kind of half-half, I suppose. It's more of a multi-tool like we've talked about before. But yeah, if you want to burst down like a target like a Tormentor or a Champ or something for like more optimized clears, I suppose, 4th Horseman, Still Hunt, and Izzy are pretty useful. But again, most of the time we're just nuking things with abilities in the sandbox or like with Rocket Pulse. So this function tends to really not be that important in most endgame content that people play these days. Blinding GL. Blinding GLs are always useful to some degree, right? In the sandbox that we have right now, we have a lot of de-aggro tools. We have a lot of high DR stacking tools. We have a lot of healing tools. So blinding GLs, a lot of the time people are just more willing to run 2 offensive weapons rather than having a blinding GL. So this can be useful in some cases. Maybe there's some unique utility for it in some day ones or some encounters or stuff like that. But for the most part, pretty low priority. You have Liturgy with like Slideways Chill Clip, which allows you to just spam blinding with like a double fire. You can run Malicious Birthright, Ignition Code, Pardon Our Dust. You can even run like Lingering Dread with like autoloading Chill Clip. I know some people like running that. You have a Kinetic Glaive in the form of Rake Angle. We haven't had a Kinetic Glaive in a while, have we? Right? I don't know. Impulse Amplifier Chill Clip, classic. Lead from Gold Overflow Chill Clip, also a classic. Aggressive Frame, best frame on glaives, even though glaives are not that relevant right now. Refusal to Call is kind of cool too, because it has Slice. Slice is kind of nice on a glaive, but yeah, not that important. Song of Your Ute is listed as the best in-slot machine gun here. Honestly, I think Quo Victus 4 really gives it a run for its money with Accelerated Assault, which basically allows you to shoot your entire reserves without reloading, essentially. Maybe reloading like once. And then you are free to run like whatever you want in both columns. You can run double splash, which is really, really nice. Of course, it also has the new gear bonus and a solid frame as well. But yeah, Song of Your Ute, Demo, High Ground, pretty solid with Curse Thrall if you have some sort of like melee build. And then Corrective Measure and Ulterior Observation, as we talked about in the machine gun tier list, are also pretty good options as well. Withering Specials are in the low priority category because a lot of the time you want the consistency of having just infinite ammo on your Withering Gaze option, and of course the waiting period, like the single shot that you're going to do of the special or primary, that damage contribution is fairly low anyways, so hyper optimizing by going with a special is not that important a lot of the time. And in a lot of cases, if you're the Withering Gaze user, the dedicated one on your team, you're not going to be swapping off of the weapon anyway, so it doesn't matter if it's a special or a primary, because the preservation of ammo when you swap is generally not that important. So in speedrunning, you might see people run Withering Specials, whether it's, Pure Recollection, like I mentioned here, or Monody 44, or Glacial, or Sovereignty, or like Valletta F. But regardless, a lot of the time you're going to see in like day ones, in more consistency-focused environments, people are going to choose to run primaries. And so that's why I've decided to place these in the low category, whereas the primaries were in the medium category. And then finally, we have some niche stuff. So this is stuff that's really not going to see the light of day for the most part in endgame content. We have Ad Clear Rocket in the form of Tomorrow's Answer, Air Trigger, Bipod, just bipod rockets really with like ammo gen perks or whatever. So like Haliatus also has that, Folded Root, Micromort also has that, which is a rocket that's coming in the near future. We have DPS Heavy GL in the form of Outrageous Fortune. This saw some use with Temporal Blast last season, but HGLs or Heavy GLs are just really not in the best place right now. There's a bunch of them that have essentially the same role in terms of Envious Arsenal, Bait and Switch, and Explosive Light. The Ever-Present has that, Cataphract has that, VS Chill Inhibitor has that, so those are all alternatives as well. DPS Linear, we really don't need to go over this, just don't bother. Just don't bother. By the time linears become meta again, Bungie will make a linear that is worth farming. So Scintillation, Mistral Lift, Doom Petitioner, Cataclysmic, all technically the best linears, but not really worth looking at. Energy Add Clear Waveframe is almost completely outclassed by Area Denials. There's some cases where you might want an Add Clear Waveframe over an Area Denial because it kills instantly compared to Area Denials, which kill over time, but generally that doesn't tend to matter, and you can just use a Rocket Pulse also instead of a Waveframe. So yeah, Romantic Death, Repulsor, Destabilizing, Solid Roll, you have Martyr's Retribution, Forbearance as alternatives, you have an Energy Slot Blinding Gel, which is even more niche than the Kinetic Slot one. The Kinetic Slot tends to be less useful in the Energy Slot for Splash Add Clear, so a lot of the time people are willing to run Kinetic Blinding Gels and then have some sort of splashier weapon, Add Clear weapon in the Energy Slot. So that makes Energy Blinding Gels even less useful, which is why they're in the niche category. You have Wilderflight with like Auto-Loading Frenzy, Lead from Gold, Wild Style, Empty Vessel, lots of older weapons here, and for good reason. You know, there's not really any reason to farm this stuff. Energy Damage Sniper, you have like Omniscient Eye with 4 times Charm Precision Instrument, Shoreline Dissident, Keen Thistle, Icolos SR, again, not really relevant. The only damage snipers that are really relevant are the ones that they've really overloaded into the kinetic slot in the form of Praediths or something, or like Lance Ephemeral, or of course the new Dungeon Sniper, Conspiracy Honed. So yeah, the energy damage sniper is really not that relevant. You have Exotic Kinetic Primary, which can be useful in some cases, like Kvostov or Necrochasm or Bad Juju or like Outbreak Perfected, weapons like those, but a lot of people tend to prefer, once again, the energy slot because of how splashy it is compared to the kinetic slot, which tends to be like more on hit and less splashy. Next, we have Kinetic Add Clear Waveframe, which is even more niche than Energy Add Clear Waveframe, to be honest. Permafrost is pretty decent, right? It has like Rhyme Stealer and Crystalline Corpse Bloom. Demo, it has Reaper's Tithe as an Add Clear perk, which is potentially pretty interesting. You have Tusk of the Boar with like Slice Chain Reaction. New Pacific Epitaph can be used for like vacuuming ammo. But for the most part, yeah, Kinetic Waveframes, generally not really a place for them in the sandbox. Kinetic Damage Fusion. This is even less likely to be used than Energy Damage Fusions, but if you really want to use one, this is in the mint slot, right? Auto-loading Control Burst Riptide with Accelerated Assault is pretty nice. You can even run, I mean, in the future, there could be like a double damage perk fusion because of Accelerated Assault. But yeah, there's alternatives here like Lionfish, Scatter Signal, technically Burden of Guilt. But yeah, not really a reason to farm for kinetic damage fusions these days. There is just no place where fusions are really going to be taking point over something like a Rocket Pulse in terms of total damage or in terms of DPS. And then finally, our last two, we have Kinetic DPS Shotgun, Perfect Paradox, with stuff like Trench Barrel is used with Song of Flame occasionally, although I do think there are potentially better options these days than Rocket Pulses, because you can do, Snap, Rocket Pulse, Snap, Rocket Pulse, Snap, Rocket Pulse, and that would probably be more efficient than using like a rapid fire shotgun like Perfect Paradox. If you're interested in using, shotguns for damage though, Imperial Decree also exists. I guess Heritage is here for some reason as well. I just listed that, I guess, even though I don't think you should get Heritage. And then finally, we have Aureus Neutralizer, which is a kinetic Lucky Pants hand cannon. Unfortunately, the spotlight for Lucky Pants hand cannons has really been stolen by Uncivil Discourse, and that's the reason why Aureus Neutralizer falls all the way down at the bottom of this list. You can get it from Trials of Osiris, but yeah, not the most important weapon to get right now. Even though Vorpal Cascade was cool when it first came out, it immediately got slammed by Uncivil Discourse's insane outlier damage. So technically, yeah, Aureus Neutralizer, unloved, Warden's Law, former class leaders for Lucky Pants DPS, but not something I think you're going to be using anytime soon with how the current meta is shaped out. So yeah, that's basically it. That's all the stuff that I think you need to get. I know towards the end, I kind of stopped talking about where you get this stuff, but you guys can search this stuff up. It's not crazy complicated or anything, but regardless, have a good time farming. Some of this stuff I don't even have because I just haven't been playing the game as much these days. There's not a lot to do. Just been helping some friends with some stuff and playing some other games, having a good time. But I hope you guys are all doing well, and good luck if you're farming for shinies with Accelerated Assault or farming for whatever god rolls you need. And hopefully, with whatever event comes next, we'll get to use all this stuff and beat up some bosses, beat up some enemies. And I'll see you guys around.